All right, across the pond we have Stephen Mera. Stephen Mera has all kinds of titles. He's involved in all kinds of things. He's a publisher of Phenomena magazine, which has millions of readers. It's very informative. It has all kinds of paranormal stories in it, analysis, and everything else. In 1989, Stephen Mera he worked at Essex for NATO. He was a telecommunications officer. He's a ufologist, paranormal investigator. He's the lead investigator for MAPIT, which is Manchester Aerial Phenomena Investigative Team. He's a regional investigator for Bufora, which is the British UFO Research Association. So this man is very, very knowledgeable. I'm so glad to have him on the show. You've probably seen his face because he's in a lot of documentaries. So sometimes when I turn on the TV, what the heck? That's Stephen Mera. So, Stephen, tell us how you got into the paranormal. What made you gravitate to all these things like UFOs and everything else?
Well, I mean, if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have basically said it was my father, and he had an interest in the subject, and I was reading his books from a very early age, even whilst I was at school. I think one of the first books I read was Brad Steiger's Inside the UFO and Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, all those sort of things. Whilst my friends are reading comic books, I was reading those. But now, because there's been a slight change in my perspective in regarding when I talk about myself and how I got into this subject, I was initiated, I would say, into this subject through having experiences at a young age. Now, when I first came out, I didn't talk about this because being an investigative researcher for so many years, 41 years I've been at this now, is that initially I thought it would people might think be biased towards my research or my conclusions because I'm an experiencer. So I didn't say. But as time's gone on, I realized, well, you know what, more people are coming out and are now saying, that they got into this subject because of having experiences. And that's pretty much same for me. My first experience was when I was 7 years of age, and that was the initiating experience, which continued right up to never. I remember looking around and talking to people in my late teens and them telling me, don't worry about it, Steve, because when you have these experiences from a young age, they all seem to die out around when you start to get into adulthood, but mine didn't, and they still continue today as they have done since I'm 7 years of age. So I've become very familiar with these experiences, but I wanted to learn more. I wanted to know more. So I had to go down several paths. So I started doing research into the paranormal, and then I started investigating the paranormal phenomena, and then into parapsychological studies. And then I realized about some of the psychic ramifications and paranormal connections with the UFO phenomena, or if you want to term it, UAP. And I started investigating the UFO phenomena. So for me, those two subjects led me into it. Since then, I've investigated cryptid sightings, earth mysteries, ancient mysteries, you name it, basically. Anything I might consider something strange or unusual. I wrote about 7 books. I created the magazine maybe about 17 years ago. It's now in e-zine. It goes out to 1.8 million readers per month, into 12 countries in 4 languages, because we wanted to network with other researchers around the world, and that was a good way of doing it because the magazine's free. We don't charge for it, but it's a really good way of finding out information around the world and also networking with other researchers. Since then, I started writing for television many years ago, and then ended up in front of the camera. And since then, I've probably done maybe 300 or 400 television shows and documentaries. I've been involved with a number of movies as well with Hammer Productions and others. And then I got into television series with Fox TV and hosting shows. And then I got into the events, running events, bringing conferences together, speakers from all around the world. So you could say I'm involved in this in 360 degrees, and still continue today. I am a member of a number of esteemed organizations and a number of think tanks around the world. And I still do as much as I possibly can regarding investigation courses, tutoring, and of course, the research programs I'm involved in, which is Phenomena Project and Project Doorway and a number of others over the years. And so I certainly keep myself very busy, guys, as much as I possibly can.
Well, that's amazing, Stephen. And it's so funny that you were saying that you read Brad Steiger books and Eric von Daniken's Cherry of the Gods. So did I when I was a little child. And I got to know Brad Steiger, and before I knew it, my articles were going into his books. So yeah, Brad Steiger. In fact, I feel like I learned everything from him when I became a paranormal investigator. And I just got to say something real quick about Stonehenge. When I went to England and I went to Stonehenge, right? I went there with my ex-wife, and my ex-wife was looking at it. And she goes, "How long are we going to look at this?" I said, "What are you talking about? This is Stonehenge. Stonehenge." And then she goes, "These are just a pile of rocks." She goes, "Come on, I want to go to Hamblin. Hamblin, that big toy store down in London." So, I mean, oh my God, you got to have the same wavelength.
You do, you really do. Yeah, I've been to Stonehenge several times. It's a fascinating location, but there's a lot of history in the UK and as throughout Europe and many other countries about our ancestors and the incredible knowledge that they had in regarding magnetics and earth energies. So it's an absolutely fascinating subject.
And I'm so jealous because England has so much paranormal activity. You got crop circles, you have a bunch of ghosts. I mean, ghosts are everywhere. Uh, oh my God, I would have a field day if I lived in England.
Yeah, I'm sure you would, Paul, because it is probably the most, I mean, I can quite probably say the most paranormal country on the planet, I would think. But, we've got, for the size of our country, we've had more battles here than any other country worldwide. Skirmishes, battles between ourselves. We talk about the American Civil War, but we had several of them over here, battling the Welsh, battling the Scots, battling the Irish sometimes when they came over. There is so much history and it's scattered because everybody has seemingly put foot in the UK over the years, be it the Romans, the Celts, and many, many other factions, different societies. And they've all been here at some stage. And there's not been probably 2 years of peace in the UK ever, to be honest with you, only more in modern times. So you can imagine the rich history it's got. Yes, we have our paranormal phenomena. Yes, we have lots of castles and stately homes and manor houses, which are very, very old. And
And
with that,
black cats.
and black cats, we have black cats. We have dogmen sightings. We have black dogs. We have a lot of strange things here in the UK. And I can say it's certainly rich. It's certainly a place, if you're really into that particular subject, then certainly the UK is probably one of the most significant places. Yes.
Is it
I'm
true
so
that black
jealous.
is it true that black cats are good luck in Great Britain?
It depends. There are some societies throughout the UK that will say if a black cat crosses your path, it's bad luck. Some will say it's a good thing. Some will refer them to as omens. The wild black cats that we have in the UK, such as panthers and black leopards and other, strange cats which shouldn't be in the UK. A lot of things happened in the 1970s, and there were lots of people, wealthy people in the UK, that had those type of exotic pets, and it was not strange to see people in London walking them in the parks in the 70s, a leopard, a tiger, a lion, And then all of a sudden, like the UK does, the government didn't think about it. When you have these amnesties to handing guns, and you just go and hand them in, you don't, they don't take any details or anything. Well, they did that with the Animal Act of 1976 in the UK. They just all of a sudden came out and said, it's illegal to have exotic pets in the country. You best not get caught with them. There was no amnesty. There was no what do people all over the country didn't had all these wild animals, didn't know what to do with them. So they went out to the moors and let them go. And these cats are probably one of the most adaptable animals on the planet, and they are breeding and live in the UK, and people do see them quite regularly.
I had heard in the Tower of London, the White Tower, William the Conqueror's Tower, that they excavated the keystone of it, and there was a black cat buried there. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, aware of the story. There is a black cat buried there. The UK was steeped in superstition, witchcraft, supernatural, all sorts of different things, and some of it went underground. When I say underground, some of it was still being practiced and kept very quiet, even though that we had the huge witch hunts, which were a terrible thing that took place many years ago. But it's still intrinsically something there. Now, we have in modern times in the UK Wicca and those form of, type of magical following. But there's still strong beliefs about these locations, and that they have certain energies and practices and ritualistic things have taken places there over the years. London is full of all sorts of very interesting things, but it has a very dark history, London, as well. So it's kind of goes with two sides of the coin, you could say. There's the paranormal side, and it's the things that people would rather keep quiet, about some terrible things that happened in the past.
One of my favorite movies growing up was the Wicker Man, the one from like 1970, I think it was somewhere around there. And that was some type of English island or something where the police shows up.
That's right, and I think he did a remake of that film with Nicolas Cage. I don't think it was as good as the original.
No,
but it is scary. Yeah, I mean, it's like there are certain factions that have their own beliefs. These factions, they're a bit like Amish, your Amish type people.
Yeah,
they have very unusual. Ritualistic things, and of course that film, which was very scary, because it just goes to show that some of those societies may have been around for quite some time doing those sorts of things. We see that type of sacrificial thing going on all over the world in our ancient times. Sacrificing people to the gods was a common trait throughout most ancient civilizations around the world.
Yeah. Sorry, Paul, you were about to say something. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I think Zandine was ready to say something.
No, I'm just amazed that being able to talk to Steve with all the knowledge he has. I've been following your magazine. Through Paul, and it's just amazing to be able to talk to you. As you were talking about England and London, some things that were going through my mind. I wanted to ask somebody that really knew of the history, such as yourself, about 007, John D, the Black Magician. I wanted to know, was he who they say he was, and was his magic in his head, or the demons that had him do the things, or the stuff that he ended up doing initially, training with the wives and the different things of that nature. And then I want to say the Enochian magic part. Do you believe that there really is some lost knowledge from Chinook or Enoch handed down somewhere, or do you think that's just part of the, myth of scrolls? So I want to know what you thought about those things.
Yeah, really good questions, Ray. Well, the first thing I can say is John Dee is very, we've got the old paperwork documents in the UK, which you can read and which you can study. And he was clearly an occultist.
Okay.
He was clearly utilizing invocation, the summoning process. It was documented that there were people that witnessed phenomena firsthand in his, in his presence. And he was also utilized as a wealth of knowledge, but also there was some amount of fear with him. It was like a bit of a loose cannon. Some people feared him, some people utilized him to obtain information. As for where he was getting information from, might have been third party, as you can imagine. But yes, he was definitely a cultist and was definitely involved in invoking phenomena. Now, when you talk about Enochian, that is still very much alive even today in hierarchy circles. Not only Enochian ritualistic practices, Sumerian ritualistic practices, and ancient Latin ones. In fact, there are people, even within the space program, believe it or not, even in current times, that very secretly pay homage through ritualistic practices because they believe they have a higher success rate, better health, wealth, and all sorts of things. And that has been going on in the hierarchy for a very, very long time. It's still going on today.
That started before Jack Parsons and all that, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, it started long before Jack Parsons. I mean, this goes back to the early 1900s. Then 1934, it settled in Germany, which was then picked up by the absolutely. It was picked up then by the German Metaphysical Society. It became the Vril Society.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Now you're talking. Now I want to ask you, the craft made supposedly that Maria Ostick, when she channeled information, and it was good enough to get craft that were able to fly that well. I mean, and did Hitler actually borrow those and use those 100 to defeat that admiral's ship up in Antarctica? I heard a story about that. I don't know. Not many people know about it.
Yeah, well, the thing is, Ray, this story is it's cut in half. You've got elements of things which aren't true. You've got elements of things that are true.
Okay, sure.
What we do know as fact is that the Vril Society caught the eye of the SS, and the officers were providing military information over to the manufacturers, the aerospace industry of Germany. They wanted to tap the source. And they're not the first to do that, but I'll get to that. And what they obtained information, you see, when dealing with the phenomena, once you do establish connection with what is referred to as NHI, non-human intelligences, they try and get information from them in advanced technology, information that may help them build some type of better aircraft. Now, back then, and I think it is even now, that if you have air supremacy, then you're going to win the war. It's as simple as that. And that was a real big concern, not only to the UK, but the US. And I'll be honest, the US came in and saved us, to be honest with you, because whilst we were panicking, we already had a signed paper in our parliament basically saying that we surrender to Hitler. And it was only within weeks of being that delivered when the Americans came in to help us. That's how far it got, because they were leading in technology, the aircraft, the tanks, all sorts of different things. How luckily for us, we had the Spitfire, which was an amazing aircraft, which did help. But the whole you got to consider they had been preparing for this for quite a long time, and all of a sudden it's just a tsunami of stuff happened. Now that was a big concern. The thing is with dealing with NHI, they do give you bits of information, but they don't give you a full picture, because the whole thing is about trying to get you to come back to the circle. And what they do eventually is they get under your skin, and then they start affecting your life and things. So, and that's what they want. So it's like teasing. I'll give you a little bit. So what they did is those little bits, they went off and manufactured, and yes, they created anti-gravity devices, and they had several different versions of this. Now, the thing is that they were not superior in flying. They got off the ground, they could fly around for sure, but they were not good at traversing at fast speeds and maneuvers. That was a problem because they hadn't quite got it right, but they were that far away from completing it. And that is why there was such a mad panic, not only to get into Germany, but to also get hold of the technology and get hold of the scientists that were dealing with the technology and get them over to the US and see what they can do for the US. I understand that. That sort of thing with dealing with NHI is been a continuous thing. You know, Bell, Boeing, Douglas, they've all been at the table with these seances doing the same thing, trying to get little advance, including Lockheed. And sometimes they do get some things which goes into the program and it gets created. They don't give a full picture, of course, but they do give helping hands sometimes. But you know what? The big question is, does it come at a cost? Sometimes it seemingly does so. I mean, if you talk about Jack Parsons, when he was doing In a Flat with Ron Hubbard, you know, he got through to, you know, it started having poltergeist stuff take place. And then when he eventually punched through and communicated with NHI, the first thing they said to him, he says, you've got to go to these coordinates in the Mojave Desert. And when you get there, this is what you need to do. We want a sample of your blood. He actually had to take a sample of his own blood. So it had to have been a blood sacrifice type thing. He had to take a sample of his own blood, take it out to this certain location in the Mojave Desert, put it down, and do this ritualistic practice. And he obtained information. He'd go straight into work the next day with the information. I know how to build this rocket. I know how to get us to space. I know how to do this. And he also got downloaded information from them regularly, as like many other inventors and rocket geniuses around the world. So yes, they do get advancing bits. Sometimes, though, it might come at a cost. There's a little bit of a gamble. But even the hierarchy, even today, are doing the same thing.
Wow. So they let him get a little information. I mean, what about George Van Tassel? Didn't need to do the sacrifice, but they're dealing with these dark entities. And you know, you got Landers, California, and then you got the other desert. It seemed like it's like some kind of relation. I don't know. Would you back that point up?
Yeah, location is a big thing, Ray. And the geology of the land, rocks, mountains, cliff sides, volcanoes, you know, these things are very connected with the phenomena geologically. You know, I mean, Van Tassel, I mean, he got told to go out there as well. I mean, in fact, you know what? They ended up at Giant Rock. And where is that? If it's, you know, it's in the same.
Yeah, right over there where Van Tassel was, Giant Rock. I visited.
That location, though, you know, we started seeing in the 1950s the first UFO conventions being held there at Giant Rock, but it wasn't about UFOs being seen. The initial incident that took place was the sighting of 3 non-human entities walking out of that rock. So the rock became something significant. And in fact, you know what? They even chiseled part of it out and made a room in there. And they practiced an invocation there, and it actually worked.
Lived in there for a while. Yeah. He stayed in there sometimes. Yeah, right. Him and his family, whatever.
Quite a few people have done that. Have traveled over to the Mojave Desert and changed their lives, and contacts and contactees, different types, you know. But yes, it does seem that, you know, geologically, location is a special thing. And what's in that location? Usually stones, cliffs, boulder fields. You talk about boulder fields where most of the missing people go, missing 411 cases. And the mountain ranges, the national forest areas, you know, the volcanoes, you know, there's a geological connection with this phenomena.
Yeah, and there's a lot of missing people out there and everything else. That's a very strange place.
It's, you know what, it's not just throughout the national parts of the US. There are other places around the world which are what we might refer to as those types of locations where they are profound human disappearances. Now, we're nowhere near knowing the amount of people that do disappear under those circumstances, but what we can say is that 4.3 million people across the planet have disappeared in unusual circumstances. And that's the population of New Zealand. So that's a lot of people over a period of time. That's the ones we do know about.
And Stephen, like when I was with military intelligence, some of the guys that I talked to that were into ufology, they talked about angel stops. And angel stops was an agreement of extraterrestrials and the military where they told the military, look, we'll give you some of our technology, some of our knowledge of our technology, if you allow us to abduct so many people. And they went over their quota, and those are angel stops.
Well, yes, I mean, this is obviously, this was the agreement with with the president, I think it was, I mean, this was the obtained technology, but you know what, you can't trust, you can't really trust them, and I've always had this point, that I understand people might have euphoric experiences. They might think that they're really good and stuff, but that's okay, and I'll be hands up. But what I have to say is, well, let's at least level the playing field, put it all out on the table. There are people that have been injured or worse, due to this phenomena. We cannot ignore that. So when you go out there into a remote location and you offer yourself to investigate this phenomena firsthand, and you're basically in a location where there's nobody around, you can be putting yourself at risk for sure. Absolutely. Some people have had experiences that wish they'd never had. So I can't support the fact that it's all love and light, but I can support the fact that this phenomena has agendas and it does so many very different things. Now, there are over 4,000 different entities that have been reported in the last 70 years. 4,000 varied entities. Interestingly, they all have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, fly around in similar craft and do similar things. Talk on looking at the NASA reports and Arrow, the Pentagon UFO program reports. What happened last year? Something significantly changed last year. Because for the last 70 years, we've been going with this terminology, ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and ETs. But all of a sudden, at Pentagon level, they stopped using it. They started to use the word interdimensional, and they started to use the word NHI for non-human intelligence. And I thought to myself, well, this is really interesting, because it's seemingly they want to change the narrative slightly and bring you from that for the ETH over to the other side, especially after NASA released a report saying they're aware of UFOs. They're aware that pilots have seen them and filmed them, and they've got these videos and they've been out there. They're aware of all that. But they said there's no superhighway going backwards and forwards to Earth. Now, we conducted a survey 5 years ago, and that survey was to deal with as many countries around the planet to find out how many UFOs are seen or reported on a daily basis on a planetary scale. Now, you have to take in consideration, to being conservative here, is that some of these countries don't even collect data. Some of these countries weren't going to share that information. So we could only do it on, say, half of the world's countries, which were willing to participate. Now, going off those records, looking on a global basis, there's a UFO seen every 8 to 30 seconds around the planet during a 24-hour day. Now, that leads to multiple thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of UFOs being seen in every shape or size. There was no base model for the UFO. Even Hynek said in 77 at a closed meeting, he said there were over 12, this is Blue Book, at the time had over 12 million varied objects. There is no base model for the UFO, even though that we had a lot of flying saucers in 1952, and they call it the saucer year. But we got triangles, tubes, bell shapes, all sorts of different things. Any shape, any object goes. So we started to look at that and the statistics and say, well, where are they all coming from? Because if we've got hundreds of thousands of sightings, where are the objects coming from? They must be tracking in and tracking out of planet Earth. Now, we do know we have had some things in orbit around the planet. We know that from the STS film footage of the shuttle when it was in orbit. NASA were filming them all the time. But nowhere near the amount that we should be getting. We should be having a superhighway of activity going backwards and forwards. Now, we've got some very good equipment now, and it measures the ionosphere around planet Earth. And anything coming through the ionosphere causes an ionospheric disturbance, just like a boat in the ocean or lake. It leaves a wake that's detectable to any of the equipment. This equipment is from the 1970s, and it's still very good. You know, we've got a lot better equipment now, and satellites. We've got, you know, we've got about 70,000 satellites out there, you know, looking around on planet Earth. You know, it's not hard to miss hundreds of thousands of things tracking backwards and forwards. We get some things sometimes, but not a lot. Big question is, where are they all coming from? Well, the what's happening now is that seemingly the UFOs might be flying around, but they're seemingly manifest and demanifest. They pop into our reality, they go about the business, and then they dematerialize. So we're looking at something which might be interdimensional. We might be looking at a phenomena that presents itself in multiple ways. Be it this, where's all the Space Brothers gone from the 1970s? You know, we've got the reptilians, we've got the blue ones, the tall ones, the grey ones, you know, the hairy ones. You know, we've got 4,000 very different beings. Could they really be all from 4,000 different planets and different civilizations? It's getting a bit thin, and they can't keep going with that narrative for too long. Now they have to say, right, we've got to change the narrative. And I've talked with people in the hierarchy here in certain establishments connected to the US government, and they've said, look, over the next 3 years, that narrative is going to be strengthened over and over again, because we need to start thinking a different way about this phenomena. And I tell you, the more we get into that, it is far more than just nuts and bolts craft traveling from another planet. We're going to have to digest and try and understand its esoteric connection, its paranormal, supernatural qualities about these things. That is the struggle. That's the problem with disclosure, is not that these things are here, but what they might represent as well. They're representing things that people are going to naturally think, oh, it's all demons or it's all angels.
Yeah,
No.
I'm tired of hearing that.
Exactly. That's a problem they've got to deal with.
And it's interesting too. A lot of people who have been abducted, they say that the Greys can walk right through the walls and take them away. And when I was working at California Department of Fish and Wildlife, I talked to this one hunter, and this hunter told me that his friend actually shot at a Bigfoot and it blew up into sparks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that tells me right there it's probably interdimensional. It goes from our reality to its reality and back and forth.
Well, you know, this phenomena, all phenomena, supernatural, Bigfoots, you name it, it's a metaphysical phenomena. It is metaphysical. In other words, it can change from being physical to non-physical at will and back again. Now, we didn't realize this in early experiments. This was not done in the UFO field or the cryptid field. It was done in the paranormal and parapsychological experiments, dealing with communications with NHI. This is where the first entities appeared. Nothing in association to the abduction or contact cases. It happened around the seance tables and continued right through to, I think, till at least 1998, 1999, with some of the last documented physical evidence incidents of these manifestations by them. Now, the experiments over the years, which they've tried to keep quiet, some of them have come out. We've been involved in some of these experiments, and yes, they do actually work. You can contact and deal with, they will say, we are interdimensional beings. We come from this planet, or we come from that planet. But if you start to press them, they'll back off. They won't answer you, or they will give you deceptive information. You can never trust 100% everything is true what they tell you. But then they've also told things which we've later on proven scientifically to be correct. So we know sometimes we do get good information. So it's a bit of a gamble. Now, we know that the metaphysical phenomenon, because what happened during these experiments was the manifestation of miniature UFOs was seen. And they were the size of a dinner plate, and they were moving around the room. And to look at it, it is a saucer. It's got lights on. It doesn't look like a toy. It looks real. It looks physical. And it's just a miniature one. And it flew around the room and it shined a spotlight, a beam of light, which like a pencil beam came down, hit the table. And as this object moved around the room, it never left the point on the table. So it was directed the beam as it was moving. Other objects were seen, and people just thought, would look, will you please come over to me and land in my hand? Just the thought of that, they interacted with, and they came over and landed in their hands, and they could feel mass to them. They could feel weight. The amount of light coming off some of these things was about 7,000 watts. Now, you've probably been to a baseball stadium or American football stadium. Those stadium lighting, which is like 5,000 watts per bulb, you can see the amount of light it covers onto the ground. Illumination and illumination. Now, with these light sources from some of these objects, even though they're small, was up to 7,000 watts of light in illumination. But it didn't illuminate the surface like normal physics would expect light to react. It was very centered. It was controlled and kept close to the object. And this is what we see in the UFO phenomena. Over a period of time, we realized some of these objects they were proving it themselves. They wanted to demonstrate themselves to us, showing us that we have to understand that they are metaphysical. Some of these objects came over and went through the table and up through the table and down through the table, and then bounced on the table. And what they did is then, yes, okay, they bounced on the table several times. So you're kind of thinking, well, 1 minute they're not physical if they're going through the table, and then the next minute they are physical and they're bouncing on the table. It was like a demonstration. Further experiments showed that the phenomena can target items. There was a glass vase which was moving across the surface of the table. Experimenters was told to move the glass jar back several times. On the third occasion, they couldn't even pick it up. Now, this is interesting because they saw it. It looks real. It looks there. It looks solid. They fired a laser at it. It bounces the light. It casts shadow. And when they went to put the hand through it, they couldn't feel it. And when they went to put the hand through, there was no numbness, no coldness, but there is a very thin filament around your fingers as you're passing through the glass, because you're not really passing through. There's nothing to grab. That happened for about 3 or 4 minutes before it transitioned back to a physical object. So what they wanted to demonstrate is metaphysics is a big thing for them. They can target an item as well and make it non-physical. Interesting, when you talk about entities, UFO beings, as you said, Paul, they can walk through a solid wall, walk up to you and pick you up. Well, hang on a second, are they physical or non-physical? Well, they're both. They've just switched from non-physical to physical to interact with us. This is why we have UFOs. They're not picked up on radar. You're thinking, well, I can see it. Pilots can see it. Well, it's not picked up on radar. It's disappeared off radar. They switched from the non-physical to the physical and back again. And what we're doing is we're seeing the phenomena, but just because we're seeing it, we think it's physical. Some of these UFOs are going into water, not leaving weights because they've switched into non-physical. It's this phenomena in the paranormal, in the supernatural, and the ufological is seemingly all similar in the way they have the mechanics. You could say it's revolving around quantum mechanics, but it's very similar in all these different types of subjects, including your cryptid phenomena. Tracks have been followed, and then suddenly half a track and it's disappeared. It's like they're like, where did it go? It's like they disappear. Some of them are seemingly non-physical. Some of them have become invisible in some cases. They can hear them, or they've seen them, and then suddenly they disappear into the background. Some of them shrink into lights. Some of them disperse into light forms. We really got to get our head around the real understanding about this phenomenon, because we're stuck in this box, and this box is our physics, and the physics that we know is wrong. There is so much more. We got to empty out some of this and start learning about this new stuff in the quantum mechanics area to try and understand that this phenomena is metaphysical, and can interact with us to be physical, like leaving prints on the ground and interacting with us physically. But at the same time, they can be see-through, they can pass through solid items. It's the same in the paranormal, ufological, and many other of these areas.
Is there an English equivalent to Roswell? Like that, Roswell's our most famous incident in the United States. What's the most famous one in the UK?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about UFO crash sites, I mean, there's been a couple of occasions where the Burley Mountains incident in Wales was one of them. Yeah, we don't get many crashes really reported in the UK, but the largest UFO case would be the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident from December 1980, which was a NATO facility, which was housing nuclear weapons at the time. And these UFOs were seen to come down over a 3-day period and also apparently engaged with these nuclear warheads and caused some concern regarding disarming them or leaving them not working. We've heard stories about this before in other places around the country, around the world. Maelstrom UFO base, the Russians already had this incident as well, and many others. That is probably, I say Rendlesham is probably the most recognized UFO case in the UK.
Steve, I wanted to ask you about what do you think about Valiant Thor? I want to know what you thought about him. Do you think he's real or not? Also, do you think we're part of the 25-year plan of what, releasing, actually letting us know that there actually are aliens? And I want to know the Locas and the Talas, those interdimensional beings that came and mentioned that about the vibratory levels. I'm sure you, from what you said, you know about that as well. And then when you talked about the London and England, even though it was a while back, I was going to ask you, does everywhere have ley lines where they used to do their worship before the cities were built? And how did that work? Just some things I want to ask you.
Okay, no problem. In regarding Valiant Thor, because when we did our research, there are some very interesting stories. But there's all, the problem with any story is when you start to research, it starts to fall apart. I mean, we were provided with different research from different locations of the world, and we were provided even photographs of Valiant Thor. Unfortunately, 4 of these, there were 4 different individuals. They didn't look the same, so that was the first problem. There were some interesting stories, but is at a time about that time when that happened, there was a lot of talk about, extraterrestrials, kind, loving extraterrestrials are going to change humanity for the better. I mean, this is a time when, we've just come out of Vietnam War and, there was a drive for honesty and a savior to come along and point us in the right direction.
Wow.
Now,
okay.
Now, there are some stories that some presidents and even people in the royal family that have had experiences in regarding these non-human intelligences. Now, some of them are very interesting, and they are quite well documented. But when we started to look, I mean, Valiant Thor, big guy, said to have blonde hair, even though that there are several photographs of him and it's not exactly the same person. Said to come from Venus. At the time, the first information that came out is that NHI said they came from the moon. Before that, they said they came from under planet Earth, like Agartha and, those type of places. These places in India have a name for it, Shambhala. They said that they came from underground, Hollow Earth, in a sense. That's where those stories generated. But then they said, because when we've realized, well, if we've got Hollow Earth, where's these places? And apparently, through detection of satellites and topography now, which is all over the world, not seemingly finding something in the public domain, that leads to that being truthful. So then they changed the story and said, well, we come from the moon. Of course, NASA's been to the moon, they've done photography and all sorts of different things. Yes, there might be some strange things on the far side of the moon, I agree, which might not be ours, or it might be ours, or it might be somebody else's, and other countries, if they've got high tech to get there, of course. But again, we didn't see huge civilization on the moon. They changed the story and said they came from Venus. Hence, this is, with the Valiant Thor.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and we had the Pleiadians and Nordic type beings saying we're Venusians. It's interesting because they say, oh, we're the Pleiadians. Well, Pleiadians are from the Pleiadian star system, not from Venus. So, are they from Venus? Are they Pleiadian? No, these Nordics, you can use different names for them. Different places.
And we did the tall whites. Like, back to what you said about the aliens not really they only give you a little bit of something. How Charles White talked about the whites always want to do deals and being fair, but they're not fair with you. Yeah,
I don't think, Ray, that we are getting true responses, because when we sent satellites to Venus and we realized it's such a poisonous, hot environment, could really life like that survive? Because apparently, according to the textbooks, Valiant Thor was just like a very clever human.
Yeah.
So you think, okay, well, if they didn't come from Venus, and when we pressed them, the story changed again. They said, oh, we come from Mars. So now we've got rovers on Mars, and we're looking at, you see a few unusual things there. Maybe it was one civilizations millions of years ago, maybe, but nothing looking like there's a civilization there now. And then the story changed again, and it's going further out now. It's like, oh, well, we're from Aldebaran, or we're from Pleiades, and we're from there, and we're from here. It's going further and further and further away. It's like, well, come on, guys. I mean, make your minds up. You told us 20 different things now. Where are you coming from? And the problem is that how do we know we're getting truthful responses? This is the problem with it. It's like it wants to remain secretive and still wants to go about. One thing I can say is that, do they care about planet Earth? Because people have said, oh, it's all about planet Earth. Well, the problem is that if it is, then we are damaging planet Earth so much that we've got to a point, we've got people out there still protesting about, we've got to stop, we've got to save planet Earth. We've already gone past that point, be honest, guys. Even if they stopped it today, even if somebody signed a piece of paper and said, that's it, it's going to take 50 years for that system to slow down. We've already gone past the point of stopping the damage on planet Earth. This is why trillions of dollars are spent looking for new planet Earth. This is exactly what they're doing. It's where a lot of money is going, looking for new planet Earth. So are they here to save planet Earth? Have they stopped us? Have they stopped us stop burning the rainforest down, Pluto in the water? No. So what is it? It's about humanity. Well, no, because you know what? They've sat back, and they've been here forever, guys. They've sat back and watched us kill ourselves in the millions, and still doing it even today. They're not stopping it. They're not interacting and saying, whoa, kids, stop fighting. This is, Big Daddy has to come in and sort it out. They're not doing that. So if it's not about us, and it's not about a planet, it's about agenda. It's about surviving of a species, us. Because everything that is happening within the UFO community seemingly is engaging us about learning, progression, biologics, samples. It's like everything is about what you do to save a species, and not only save it, but really understand it. But these guys have seemingly been around for probably before documented history. They're no newcomers to the block. In fact, we're probably the new kids on the block, to be honest with you.
And Stephen, and you would think that the extraterrestrials would be assisting us in saving the planet because they have alien bases throughout the world. There's like one outside of Los Angeles by, I forget what island it is. There's one in the Monterey Bay, possibly one in Bermuda Triangle. So it's interesting that they're not stepping in, but they stepped in over in Montana and shut down our nuclear capabilities. So that was kind of interesting. And I wanted to ask you about Rendlesham. There was that one soldier who touched the craft, and he got this binary code in his head, and he wrote it down, and it was communication. And it seems like there were time travelers. They're from 8100 AD, So what do you think about that?
Well, you're talking about a gentleman called Jim Penniston, and I did a lot of research, a long time ago. And to be honest, I don't, is my opinion, and a few others, researchers in top areas, that consider his information pertaining to this downloaded information he got when touching the craft might not be sincere, might not be authentic.
Oh.
Now, and I'll tell you the reasons why, buddy, is that it was at least maybe 15, 20 years later when he came out with that information. Why would he not talk about it? Because he said he didn't want to talk about it. Well, why? You know, he talked about other sensitive things regarding what was experienced during those 3 nights of UFO activity, even to the point with almost climbing on top of one of these objects. If you're prepared to say that, then, you know, obviously having some type of information regarding, you know, critical information that might be very important to the US and the UK was left out, and it didn't appear in any shape or form until many years later. And when you started to look at the information, it even references an island off the shores of Ireland, an island off the shore of Ireland, where this was referenced, and he said we're time travelers, and you know we're trying to save humanity and this, that, you know. I don't get it. I don't believe that end of the story. I would have thought that would have manifested at least within the first 10 years. I mean, you'd expect that information. Now, taking into consideration all his notes, all his material was being passed to Commander Charles Holt. Charles Holt said, I never got that information. It didn't turn up until years and years later. In fact, Jim Penniston, you know, is only ever documented that when it started getting book deals, interestingly enough. Now, there is Burroughs, who's the other gentleman he was with. And I believe he's been absolutely sincere about that, about his experience, that yes, it was a craft, it was triangular shaped, it was hovering off the ground, it was seamless, had no rivets, he touched it, no downloads, no information, but there was a slight hum to it, and it recognized it was touched and powered up slightly and started to lift off slowly. You know, it didn't cause him any harm, but in fact, Burroughs did go on to have medical problems from being in close vicinity to the object, because he actually climbed on top of this thing, you know. So, you know, it's problematic. This is the problem that you've got with this subject. You've got really good information, and then you've got disinformation, and it's not necessary. We don't need the disinformation because we know this stuff exists, to be honest. But it does cloudy and muddy the waters many, many times. And that's what happens in these instances. It's happened in Rendlesham. It happened in Roswell. You know, if we really start looking into the Roswell incident, there are areas where you think, okay, that doesn't fit. That's not quite right. And other areas you think, absolutely, that fits, you know. So you've got a little bit of both here. And I think it might be done purposely. I don't really know. But it's like, no matter what information you get, you can guarantee there is a percentage of disinformation in there. And it's left for us to try and work out, if we can, which is which.
How many cases of either UFO sightings or abductions or visitations or crashes happened before the nuclear age? And is there somehow a connection between nuclear power, nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, and the UFOs? Because of, you know, the incidents that happened around bases that you mentioned, it seems to be a reoccurring theme with this.
It is, yeah. I mean, in fact, the alien abduction phenomena didn't exist prior, or pre-nuclear, or certainly the high atmospheric testing that they did. But there were contact cases, so there is a difference between the two. The contact cases are ancient; they go back for a long, long, long time. But the physical, you know, in other words, you're forcefully physically taken by these beings, kicking and screaming. You don't want to go. That's the abduction phenomena. It didn't present itself until sort of really thoroughly until sort of the 1964. I mean, I think Betty and Barney Hill was 1961. Sorry, it was Betty and Barney Hill, September, was one of those. But they weren't taken kicking and screaming. There was some form of, it was half abduction, half contact experience, really, because they were reluctant to go and didn't really want to go, but they did go, you know. So they don't know if they were overwhelmed psychologically about it, but there was some participation, some. And afterwards, it was like that was the problem with it. You know, they couldn't settle knowing this. After that, we had some cases in the 1970s, but boy, did we start getting the rise from the 1980s. So we have to consider, okay, so what was happening through the latter 1980s and into the 1990s? Well, what happened was media interest in alien abduction phenomena shot through the roof with the TV series X-Files, you know, Mulder and Scully. Our reports went crazy. You know, it went overnight, literally to quadruple the amount of people that was reporting UFOs, alien abduction cases, all sorts. Now, the same thing happened late 1970s, 77, 78, and 79, because of the Steven Spielberg Close Encounter movie. There was a huge flux in reported incidents. Now, don't get me wrong. People will say, "Oh, well, it's just because people wanted to be famous or wanted to have some acknowledgement that they were special, you know, or it was just some strange belief system we have." Not necessarily, because now we know through scientific research carried out over the last 6 years that people are suddenly start to believe differently. Sometimes it makes them have experiences. It's no different than having a religious experience. You know, you are not going to have the sighting of something religious if you don't already have a belief system in religion. Suddenly, people started to believe in UFOs so much more, they started to see them. And I think some cases, we're seeing over the last 3 years a sudden increase in UFO activity right across the US. Why? Because there's more and more interest, more things coming out in the media, on the news, in the Pentagon, it's everywhere. More people.
Just like The Exorcist. It's just like The Exorcist. Everybody saw that, and everybody was possessed by the devil.
Exactly. So, you know, I think there is something there, because there's definitely something about consciousness and the UFO phenomena. And if you start to believe in the phenomena, you could be a skeptic all your life. But if you one day decide, do you know what, I do UFOs exist, I guarantee that is when people will start seeing them occasionally. And that is different. That's interesting, because you think there must be something consciousness about this subject, because, you know, it can suddenly just change somebody's life just like that they've been a skeptic all this time. And then you decide, okay, do you know what? I believe this guy's on the news. I believe these guys in the Pentagon, what they're saying. Suddenly, a week later, they see something strange in the sky. You know, and that's what happens. And this is what's so profound about this. It's not delivered in the normal physics of understanding of a subject, because it has a conscious connection with the observer. And now we also know what's actually happening, because years ago, during people having experiences, because of our studies, we now know where we can certainly go. We can measure the geological aspects of the land by utilizing satellites. We can look for positive magnetic regions. We can look for areas of high activity of UFO manifestations. We can go to those locations. And if you to have an experience, in other words, conscious connection, it's like Bluetooth pairing between you and the UFO. You're watching the UFO goes, "Oh, who are you?" You know, and there's a Bluetooth pairing sort of thing happens. That happens so quick. We've measured this, and how we're measuring it is because now we have pieces of equipment. It's called a flow band. You put it on your head, and it measures your brainwave activity to your mobile cell, to your cell phone. So basically, you can look at your own brainwaves. But when you have that conscious connection, that Bluetooth moment with that UFO, your brainwaves change from normal waking state into theta straight away, as fast as 20 seconds. So that's how much time we've got to recognize this conscious connection with the phenomena, if it wants to choose so. Now, when we start to see theta suddenly coming in, that's not normal in the waking state, but it puts you into this. And this is a manipulative state. It's a state of mind where you daydream, you're hypnagogic, you're hypnopompic, going in and out of sleep. Your hypnosis, that's theta as well. It's where people can be manipulated into what they want to mold. In other words, we want you to perceive this, we want you to think this, or we don't want you to react. It also does something called cognitive limitation. And that's crazy, because you'll have a camera in your hand and you won't take a picture. And you think afterwards, bloody hell, why didn't I take I had a camera in my hand, why didn't I take a photo? You didn't think to, because that's cognitive limitation. It does this. It takes control of you in that environment, and you won't think like normal until after it releases you. Once that release happens, afterwards you go, why didn't I talk about seeing that? Why didn't I talk to somebody else? They must have seen it. Why didn't I take a photograph? So now we're really understanding the physics that's involved in some of these type of contact cases, or Bluetooth pairing, the observer effect, the conscious connection with the phenomena.
When you said, I don't want to interrupt you. I want to ask you about you brought up the religious aspect. See, a lot of people could get in trouble because, like, you don't have to pay money. Say if you are a religious person and you go to a park, you go somewhere with some friends and you guys meditate and you say, hey, we want to make a connection, and you actually do of some kind. I mean, at some point, some people are doing it and they're not tithing. They're not asking you to pay money or anything. It's no Bible, no book. I mean, that would be a stiff competition to a lot of things. So I would see that as a problem if you're really going down that road. That's one big thing I saw about that. Because guys are saying, hey, I can show you ships and stuff. They don't really understand what they're saying, to some of these people out here. And then I was gonna ask you straight up, like Preston Dennett, I like his research on a lot of humanoid encounters and stuff. Those are what I'm with that right now. Forget the UFO stuff. We know they're here. We've seen them. We don't know who's on them. We have people have contact. I'm sure people have close encounters of the 10th kind, if you want to classify it that. So I want to know what your take is on that, like, going further up in the ante.
Right, absolutely right. I mean, I talked with Preston Dennett only about a month ago. I am aware of his work, and the thing is, he's a great guy, and he's done a lot of work.
Amazing.
It really is. Now, the problem that we have here is that, okay, we are initially connecting UFOs with contact cases. It wasn't always like that. There is a process of this phenomena changing through time. If we talk about the phenomena of abduction, it took place in Ireland. It was fairy folk, and how did they ward away the fairy folk? Well, they used iron. Wrought iron, not cast iron, wrought iron. And the shape of the horseshoe is not about luck. It was never about luck, right? It's about placing it over doors and over windows to ward away the bad folk, to ward away the spirits, ward away the things that come in the night, those sort of things. The things that apparently were allegedly stealing children. Not stealing children, abduction phenomena. The UFOs that were seen at that time were described as trains, flying trains for strange things, small folk, the fairy type, the fae. In fact, in medieval times, they used to put iron nails around beds because we found them. If you go to old stately homes and you do metal detect, you'll find that there's iron circle of nails right round where beds used to be, because they used to hammer them into the floor to ward away the bad spirits, the bad things that come in the night. Ward away these things. Iron, not raw iron, not can. So we thought, okay, well, where's this originate? What is going on here? We find that when we go back to the Middle East, ancient times, they're using something called hematite. Now, hematite is mostly iron. And what were they doing? They were wearing it and keeping it in rings to ward away the jinn. The same sort of thing. In medieval times, it was used all over the world. If we go throughout Europe, and you might even find some in the US, I'm not too sure, but definitely throughout Europe, if you look at a church and the cemetery, you'll find that, especially throughout Europe, is that the church and cemetery are divided by iron gates and iron fencing all around. And people miss it. There's old ancient traits that go back a long, long, long time in regarding why these things appear in so many different cultures in so many different ways, doing the same thing. It's like the phenomena is always going to be the phenomena, but the mask is always changing. The mask has changed over the years. And the thing what you're saying is about religion and that. Well, we now know when Professor Diana Posalka managed to get into the Vatican, and it's a dream come true. She's left for 3 days on her own, unattended. I would love that, The thing is with the Vatican City, which is a city, you know, now it's classed as its own country. You know, they could enter into the World Cup in soccer if they wanted to, but I wouldn't imagine seeing a load of priests running around the pitch would do very good. However, the thing is that place, it's a library. Forget about the church, forget about everything. It's a library because there's 53 miles of library under the ground. Before you can even see Vatican City, you're already standing on it underground. It's 53 miles of the library. It's the biggest resource, secret resource in the world. Now, she got access. And what did she do? She did exactly what I would do. She would go back and look at the source information. In other words, these encounters with angels, these encounters with biblical figures, you know, monks and all these other godly things that turned up. She went back and looked at the original source information. And you know what the original source information said? It was not an angel. It was not the Virgin Mary. You know, these things were described and documented in diaries by nuns and monks and many other people originally as small figures. And some of these experiences weren't nice. You know, we're talking nuns, you know, documenting the diaries that, you know, this small figure turned up in the room about 3 foot tall and had this prong in its hand and thrusted it up her entrails. Well, that's not a nice thing. You can well imagine. Do you know what they did? They changed it. They changed the figure into a cherub, and the cherub's dart or the Cupid's arrow was the same thing. They changed that, put that prong into that, and they called it. It's all now spiritual, and it's all the Holy Spirit. You should let the Holy Spirit in. And you know what? They changed and twisted so many. You know, we had Francis of Assisi. You know, he said he was supposed to see God, you know, and he had the Christ runes on his hands. No, he didn't. A UFO came down from the sky and zapped him. He went like that to shield his face and got seriously injured by this thing, and it burnt his hands. You know, this Francis of Assisi was the first guy to create a flying saucer grid, to be honest with you. You know, and there were hundreds of cases like that. So even the Vatican know about changing the aspects and concepts of this phenomena to fit it into what they want. And then they place it into Bibles, and these are the stories that we read. Unfortunately, this phenomenon has been around for a very long time and even interacted with the most religious people. If we talk about the most religious place on the planet, it's Lourdes, which is in France. Millions of people go there every single year. You know, because there was Saint Bernadette. She was classed as a saint, a young girl who saw the Virgin Mary in a cave. Remember when I talked about geological locations, caves? She saw this Virgin Mary in a cave. Well, what's the original information? Well, the original information said Saint Benedict was walking along. She saw this, and she said, she got it wrote down. She said that thing. She did not say the Virgin Mary. She described it as not even human. This thing. And yet the Vatican came along and turned it into the Virgin Mary and built a monastery, and now millions of people. So what are we praying to half the time? You know, there is the question that we have to say that maybe even the phenomenon is masked itself and is utilizing aspects of godly presence and appearance for its own source, even now. And we have to consider, you know, well, we've got to be really careful, because we have to say, well, what are demons and what are angels and what are all these other things in between? If it's not all the same thing, presenting itself in multiple different ways, interacting in multiple different ways, it's very, very problematic. So this is where when we had people in hierarchy, like the Collins Elite and the Avery program, they had special people designed to look into that very subject. Are UFOs associated with demons, these interactions, or are they associated with angelic beings and saviors? You know, is it godly? Is it a way of God presenting itself in the 21st century? You know, it was really interesting because they concluded, the Avery program and the Collins Elite, when you look at the conclusions, they were both the same conclusion. And that conclusion is the same conclusion that people are meeting now, is that there's a source of phenomena, and that source delivers it in multiple factions.
Stephen, that is just amazing. It's so great having you on the show. I got the little nudge that we went past our hour, but there was so much I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to talk to you about hard light that are seen by UFO abductees, where the light shoots out, it stops right there in the middle, doesn't hit the wall. The hard light can turn into something solid where you can actually sit on it. Gray's working with Bigfoot, seen at Mount Shasta. There's so much I want to talk to you about. So we got to have you back on the show
Yeah,
again.
guys. I'll be back on. Just let me know. We'll arrange it, guys. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate that. You guys want to say anything real quick, Stephen, before we go?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. It's been a wonderful interview. Really enjoyed all of it. And like Paul said, we would love to have you back on again.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I'd love to have back. And thanks for your inputs. Great questions. You guys keep in touch. Give me a nudge anytime you want, and we'll get back on together sometime.
Oh, and the next time we have you on too, I want to talk about the miracle at Phantom.
Oh, I know some stuff about that. Yeah, we'll keep that for the next show.
We can talk all day. Pick your brains. Oh my God.
Absolutely, guys. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the show, guys, and I'll keep in touch. And let's rearrange, and we'll get back together again soon.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Have a great night, everybody.